Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to yet again another one of our podcasts here at The Way Forward. We are very lucky today to have two distinguished gentlemen, not just one, but two distinguished gentlemen. And I will warn you up front, they're both very good friends. And so we've got General Michael Garrett here in the green shirt, and we have General Paul Funk here in the bluish shirt with the great picture behind him. These two gentlemen have served in the Army from platoon all the way to the highest levels of four-star command. And at one time, they were both brother four-star commanders together in the United States Army at Training Doctrine Command and Forces Command. Gentlemen, welcome, and thanks for joining us today. And if you don't mind, we'll go with you first, Paul. Can you just give us a quick snippet on yourself? And then same with you, Mike. And then I'll say a few more nice words and we'll get going.
So my name is Funk, and for 42 years, I got to be an American soldier. I got to wear the jersey of the greatest team ever assembled. More importantly, I got to be Mike Garrett's friend. Therefore, that's what I aspire to be for the rest of my life.
Thank you, sir. General Garrett, sir, the floor is yours.
I do love Paul, but this friendship stuff. We started talking about golf. There are a couple places where it doesn't apply, but thanks for having us on. And I have been in and around the military for my entire life. I grew up as a military kid, watched my dad go off to war a couple times. I watched my mom raise our family. I got to watch through my father some of the most iconic leaders in our Army. And I got to watch through my dad an example of excellence in most things. I mean, nobody's perfect. But I tell you, one thing that he was pretty close to perfect at is being a soldier. And I think I learned by watching and listening my father over the 35 years of his career and applying that to as best I could, to my daily life in the Army is really a big part of any success that I've ever had. And then the other and last thing, really three things that kind of keep me focused. One is my faith. I pray all the time, and when you have hard problems, sometimes that's all you can do is pray. My family, my wife is really, kind of like my mom and lots of other moms, spouses out there. She guided our family when my dad wasn't home, and now it's my wife of 35 years. She's done that for us. And then it's my friends, and I don't have lots of friends. I mean, I have a lot of people that I am friendly with. But there are about three people on this planet that, if I had one quarter, I would call, and Paul Funk would be, the first of those. And the reason I would call him is because they wouldn't ask any questions. All they would want to know is where I was and tell me how long it's going to take them to get there. And those are friends that you will have for the rest of your life. So really looking forward to this afternoon, and Paul and I, kind of sharing with whoever watches this thing, some of the things that we've learned throughout our careers.
Thanks, sir. Appreciate it. Now, for the audience who don't know you both personally, I'm sure that they will Google you if they get really super interested. You both have Wikipedia sites, which I found interesting. So what we have here is we have the iconic pairing where we have the infantry officer, General Garrett, and we've got the armor officer, General Funk. So there's a lot of give and take there in terms of rivalry between two combat arms branches, which you can kind of see starting to manifest itself. Now, both have served in Iraq and Afghanistan, but the more interesting dynamic between these two friends and these two fellow general officers is the fact that General Funk is the son of an officer, and that General Garrett is the son of a non-commissioned officer. And they're both military brats who were brought up in similar but different environments. And so I know that that's a bit of a tibble between the two of them. I too am a military brat, so people have to understand that in the audience that rivalry of armor, infantry, and military brat thing always kicks in. So you might hear that manifest itself. For both of you, you both served honorably in Iraq and Afghanistan. You both have done both of those combat tours very successfully. I know General Funk, you also were in Desert Shield, Desert Storm, and others. And so let's just say these gentlemen are more than qualified to talk about not just leadership, but leadership under stress, leadership in the most difficult of situations, and small to very, very large organizations. And so I know both of you, and I'll let you both just kind of fight over each other who goes first and answers this question, but give us your isms. I know each of you, guys at your level, you've got this list. It's under the glass on your desk. It's in your book. It hangs behind your wall. It's just a part of your matcha. What are your isms, General? Why are they important?
I think we should let Mike go first. He's the much older of the two of us.
Yes, I am 3 months and about 3 days older than Paul, and he never lets me. I'll tell you, Chris, I don't know if it's an ism, but I told you how important my dad's example was for me, and what I learned from my dad and what I tried to do from my junior year in college at ROTC Advanced Camp, not at back then Fort Lewis, Washington, throughout my 40 years in the Army, and that was to lead by example. And it's become a trite phrase. You hear everybody talk about the importance of leadership by example, but I believe it's the only way to lead. And we can explore some of that, as we go throughout, our session today. But leading by example is tough. It's a little bit easier, and even then it's not easy when you're a platoon leader and you have 30 people. Just because, think about it, 30 people in that platoon, and just think about the diversity in that platoon. So you've got age and experiential diversity. You got brand new privates to, the most experienced person in the platoon, and that's the old crusty platoon sergeant. And in my case, I had 3 old crusty, squad leaders. But every day, I tried to lead by example. And, that example in the early days was either physically, either adherence to our standards, being genuinely mindful of and caring for people. It's easy to say all of those things. It's harder to actually do them over and over and over. And so, the most important thing for me, and this is any leader, and that is, do they lead by, personal example? And, if you were to query, a whole bunch of people that work for them, would they say that the person that everybody sees is the person that they believe led them?
And I think that's a great answer, and I agree with Mike completely. Also, I have out there published on the internet somewhere, Funk's Fundamentals. There are 40 of them, and that's because I'm a slow learner. I've been in the Army 42 years, and I learned 40 things. But a couple of the ones to highlight here today were, I think, especially as it relates to kind of the bedrock of what we do. I think good soldiers do what's right when nobody's looking. And I also believe that I always like to foster an attitude and an atmosphere that caught people doing things right, and then tried to hold them up as an example for the rest of the organization, so that we could really implement positive ways to change our culture, change our procedures, or change some of the processes that we were using in whatever organization I happen to be in charge of. Because I'm an armor officer, and let's face it, do you want to carry your weapons to work, or do you want to ride your weapons to work? That's really what matters. Unfortunately, for 20 doggone years, I ended up walking around on the battlefield of Iraq and Syria, so it didn't really matter. But when we got really serious, we brought that armored cavalry outfit with us. So I truly do believe that it really doesn't matter what branch you are. What you'll find is with the folks that Mike and I surrounded ourselves with, are you find people that are have servant hearts, and that's what matters truly.
So both of you, the bottom line of what I'm hearing is presence. You know,
Yeah.
your presence down with your team, you sharing the hardship, whatever that might be, whether it's working late hours or finding yourself in combat like you guys, you're down there understanding the individuals. You're trying to out through an empathetic leadership style to find out what's going on, what makes them tick. Earlier today we had the Assistant Secretary of the Army, Deb Wada, in here, and I don't know if you both remember this or even know anything about it, but she actually did Undercover Boss, because she said, I didn't know anything about the being in the Army because I wasn't in the Army. So I went down and she played a private at Fort Jackson, and she played one of my cadets at Fort Knox during cadet summer training, again, to expose herself, through the culture that she joined, which was leaders get down to the lowest level and try to understand what makes those men and women tick in order to lead them better. And I think General Mike, with the way you're talking about setting the example, is you're there with them, and you're showing them, A, it can be done, and B, you're not too special to not do it yourself. And therefore they begin to trust you. And I think that's trust piece. Go ahead.
Yeah.
The other piece there, I mean, presence is important, but everybody's got a position on the team to play, and I think what's more important than presence, it's what you do when you are around them. The other thing that is, this is something, I don't know if it's not an ism because it isn't an ism, but I hate hypocrites. I hate hypocrisy. And nothing bothers me more than the leaders that I've observed throughout my career who talk a big game. But if you were to insert yourself in one of those formations, you'd more often than not find yourself scratching your head because the words don't line up with the actions.
Yeah.
And that, this leadership, and this goes back to this leadership by example piece. I mean, it gets hard, when you have to, for instance, you come up with a vision for your organization, and, everybody comes up with, a mission and, priorities. But when your soldiers read this stuff, listen to what comes out of your mouth, the other thing that they're doing is they're watching you every single day. They're watching you, and you may not get that feedback, but it's circulating inside of that organization, whether or not, the commander's actions are consistent with, what he espouses, either, through written or verbal, communications. And so presence is absolutely important. And, the other thing I'll share there is, it's easy to be present when you got 30 people. You have to be a little bit more artful and creative when there are 750,000 people. But my point is, regardless of that number, it does not excuse you from being present.
Right.
It does not excuse you from being present. I mean, the simple litmus test is, do people even know who their boss is? And if there's 750,000 people in your organization, well, you know what? Every single one of them ought to at least know, who the head guy is, kind of thing.
Yep.
I used to love to go to basic training graduation the morning before, as they're finishing the forge exercise. When they march in 12 miles, they're sweaty, nasty, dirty, been training for about 36 to 48 hours, just marching along. And as the sun would come up on that, and down there at Fort Jackson, as the sun would come up and the heat would start to rise off that field, and you could hear them coming, and you could hear the swish and of the grass, and they're moving in step, and they're silent. All of a sudden, a big band of lights comes on, and the next thing you know, there's the an American flag flying and the colors of the Army out there. And then they break into a program, and as they begin to summarize this program, they start talking about the streamers, all the battles that our Army has fought over the years. And then on top of that, a drill sergeant, as a commander gets up and says a few words, and then a drill sergeant walks by his or her charge and slaps that patch on their left shoulder, and looks them in the eye and says, "Now you're a soldier," and they weep. It is an incredible, ritual that really goes to what Mike's talking about. Even with 750,000 people, you have to know who the boss is. And if you have to know who the boss is, that means the boss has to be somebody willing to be seen and willing to be held up as the person in charge. And right, wrong, or indifferent, he or she, the buck stops there, right? That's what this is about. This is about leading America's most precious treasure, its sons and daughters. And frankly, you don't always get it right.
No,
but you got to be there in order to be in the game.
and that's what I was going to ask you. So pulling that thread for those in our audience who are civilian CEOs, and they're like, yeah, the Army, it's a lot easier for you guys to do it. They just do it because you tell them to do it, and you've got all this systems and everything in place. But really, what you're talking about now that we're in a civilian world, and I've been out here a little bit longer than the two of you, I see that as an excuse. I see CEOs who say, "Oh, my organization's too big. I'm in 2 states. It's too hard for me to get out and see them all." And you guys have commanded hundreds of thousands of people that, quite frankly, circumvented the earth. What were some of the techniques you used? How did you go about trying to do that? So ways that a CEO might be able to relate.
Well, let's convert it to civilian speak. Onboarding. Let's talk about onboarding. Every month, from the time I was a captain till I was a 4-star general, every month I attended a newcomers briefing for our newest arrivals on our post, and I laid out for them the standards that I expected them to achieve. And frankly, I got into the business of making sure they understood that these were the standards that we were going to adhere to. Because, sometimes people don't understand when they're being led, coached, and mentored, and they think maybe it's just a suggestion. So I tried to be very clear about what I expect. And it goes back to what I just said. Good soldiers do what's right when nobody's looking.
Good.
Yeah.
Mike, any techniques that you want to share, sir?
I think as with most things, it starts with a plan. And the more senior I got, the larger the organizations became. I had people that spent a lot of time listening to me, taking guidance and developing a plan that ensured that, again, we hit as many people as we could during our travels, that we, went to as many locations as we could. We tried to see new leaders, old leaders. We went to places that had, certain challenges. But the bottom line is, and I think, this is something that all leaders, can use, and that is have a plan. Don't let it be by serendipity. The best example I can give you is, here in Charlotte is the headquarters for Lowe's. And, I sat down with the CEO for Lowe's, and this guy's, he's a tremendous leader. And I'll tell you what, that guy's schedule looked a lot like my schedule did. He hops on a plane on Tuesday. He goes around the country visiting, you know, his stores, interacting with his people. And again, there's no excuse for leaders not to be out and about, for their people to know them. Two, it is the best feedback, you know, that you're probably going to get. And that is, you know, for me, it was taking the time to, you know, stop and say hello to a private. That's some feedback, right? Because they don't know enough. They don't know enough to be intimidated by your rank just yet, unless somebody tells them. And so they'll generally give you honest feedback on what's going on. Opportunity to interact with young officers, same kind of thing. You know, depending on their source of commission, you know, they may or may, most of the ones that I met with at least seem like they were comfortable, you know, talking to me. And so I think you got to have a plan, especially if you have a large organization. That plan should be, you know, guided by your mission. Go ahead, Chris.
No, I was gonna say, because you reminded me, the one time I remember specifically seeing you when you were at CENTCOM, and you were already in Kuwait. I think it was Kuwait. And I remember watching you come in the dining facility. No expectation, no plan, just you're doing management by wandering around. And you got your food, you talked to everybody in the line, you went over, you sat down with a group that was not expecting you to sit with them. And then when you got up and you went over, you sat down with another group you weren't expecting. So you were almost like the bee going to all the different flowers, and you were gathering feedback, unexpected, unfiltered, unplanned, unorchestrated feedback. And I think I've seen both of you do that, where you didn't let somebody below you put together the event for you to show up for, to get the top 10% to tell you how awesome you were. You guys got ways around that. That's important information as well, but also you guys breaking away from that, I thought was always really critical for leaders to do. But the management by wandering around piece is important. At least from my perspective, it was to get that unfiltered piece. But the other thing that you two, you may not know this, but for us younger guys, or not younger, more junior, some of you guys are younger than me, but when I was very junior, was understand the necessity of a large organization, have very clear, precise policies, procedures, systems in place, and having those systems in place so the routine things were done routinely. Which enabled you to get out, kind of but more adaptive, and get up on the balcony and see things without getting caught up in the day-to-day, so you could anticipate problems, or you could see potential opportunities on the horizon and do that leadership piece to get out there. But those same systems allowed you to find out what you were talking about, General Garrett, where you said, today you said, I want everybody to be left-handed. And then you went out and got on your plane, you flew around the world, you came back, you gave it enough time, then you go down and see the lowest level leader you got and say, what hand is it that I'm looking for? And they say, oh, right-handed. That system allows you to kind of check how are your words, your vision, your priorities being filtered down to the lowest level. And when you do find the kid who says left-handed, you go, why do you think I want you to be left-handed? And then you see, what is it your leaders between you and that individual have done to enhance what it is you're trying to do? I've seen you both do that. Any comments on that?
There's Chris, there's really a technique to that, right? It's not happenstance, like Mike says. You have to have a plan, and then the simplicity is the most important principle of patrolling, right? That is. And so then if you do that, I think one of the techniques I use, and CEOs can do this as easy as I can, is once you've established your priorities, mine were training, maintaining morale, discipline, and teamwork. Once you lay those out, you take a very simple approach to how do you check to make sure your priorities are being met. I used a campaign planning framework, but I also did on my personal time laid out I laid out a system where I measured what I was going to see.
Yeah.
And as I went to see them, was I spending my time on my priorities so that everyone understood what they were, where we were going, and were we making any progress on them? Otherwise, you're just putting things on the wall. So it's how your time is spent, and if in fact, what percentage of it were you looking at? And I actually, because I was a simple guy, I did one of my priorities a week. And so when I traveled, I checked on one of those priorities throughout the depth of the organization to see that it was being met. And then that's how you get feedback, if in fact you've got everybody's working from a base plan.
Mike, anything?
Yeah, communicating effectively, I think challenges even the very best of us. And it becomes even more challenging again as the environments that you're responsible for increase in size and complexity. But having a plan, utilizing the people inside of your organization that are getting paid to help you do these things.
Yes.
I had a bunch of people who were getting paid good money
Yeah.
to help me think through and communicate as effectively and as efficiently as possible.
Yeah.
The other piece of that is a lot of leaders, and again, this is an area that I don't have enough time outside of the Army. I certainly have some data points, but in the Army, commands at the senior level are 3 years or so, 3, maybe 4 if you get lucky. And so that first year, really the first 90 days, you're assessing the organization and I don't care who you are, everybody's got a boss, even the president, right? I mean, his boss, about 330 million of them.
Yeah.
But everybody has a boss, right? And so there's somebody or something that's going to provide organizationally for you, the higher level goals. And then, it's your responsibility, as Paul said, to develop a plan for your organization to meet and attain those goals. One of the things that I have learned, and actually over time, I thought got pretty good at, and that was this assessment process. I would take 90 days for this entire process, but the first 30 days, I would go in and I'd already done my own work and my own analysis. And have come up with what I believe the mission focus of the organization is. I'd have a draft. But then what I would do is I would start publishing, things that were important to me. I'd use, our websites, our newspapers, our periodicals, speaking engagements. And then, and really just ask a series of questions. And now what I'm looking for is feedback, right? Either feedback on obvious, huge omissions, feedback on things that, have been tried a whole bunch of times before and, never made any progress. And, over the course of this 90 days, it was really this constant, command and feedback or communication from me and feedback from my folks that allowed all of us at the end of this to have something that, there was alignment on. Because, I think a lot of people are good, effective communicators, but they don't necessarily have good feedback mechanisms.
Yeah.
And it's really the feedback mechanism that allows people to feel like they are being heard.
Yeah.
I mean, there's nothing more powerful than for some sergeant out there to see, and I might not have remembered talking to that sergeant, but he'll never forget, the opportunity that he had to talk to a 4-star general, the force commander, about a serious issue. And then even more powerful, when whatever the plan is, whenever it's produced, that sergeant sees his input in there. And so again, the communications piece is important.
Yeah.
but also important are good feedback mechanisms.
Hey, Mike, talk about the command and feedback piece, because you and I both learned that from Joe Votel, and frankly, I think it's one of the most effective techniques I've ever seen.
Well, and he learned it, and I think he learned it from Joe Mattis.
Yes, he did. That's
He
right.
had Mattis come in and talk to all of us about, command and feedback. But the bottom line is, I mean, commanders command, they provide guidance and orders. But all of the adjustments, if you watch any sport,
Yep.
it's really, the second half adjustments that determine the outcome of the game.
Yeah.
And we are making those adjustments, today at the pace of the fight, sometimes multiple times a day, given the information feedback that we're receiving. So the point is, feedback is important to adjust your plans, adjust your organization.
Yeah, exactly. And you can't, you don't have all the answers either. That's why this feedback is so important. And Mike's exactly right. I mean, we learned to fight through our ears. At least I did growing up. That's how I learned how to fight. And so listening becomes a critical skill.
Yeah, because what worked this morning may not work this afternoon.
Yeah,
We've all
exactly right.
seen that, again, leadership under the most arduous of conditions. It's easy, even though it's a lot less dramatic in the civilian sector, the day to day, but it's no less slow. I mean, it's not slower. It's just as fast, and it's getting faster every day. So it's that ability to be able to do that. And circle back to, again, the civilian sector, they don't, from what I'm learning, in my role as trying to coach them, is the idea of systems and processes and making all these little mundane things become irrelevant because they're just happening. And they're being looked at by the right people, but so the leaders get their head out of in the here and now, and are seeing, anticipating, listening, reading the tea leaves, if you would, of whatever it is that's feeding them their changes. Because earlier we talked about who our client was in the Army, but for them, their client is the consumer in many cases, and they're changing almost hourly what it is that they're wanting and demanding from the businesses that they may be running. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really the target. If you think about the targeting process, right? Detect, decide, deliver, and assess, right? That you're doing the same thing in markets. You're doing that thing with supply chains. You're doing all those things using the very simple mechanisms like that. And there's, of course, there's underlying pieces to all three or four of those things. Your assessment process, Mike talked about feedback. That's another name. Assessment is another name for feedback. Your detection mechanisms can be price, it can be whatever. You decide that's your piece in that chain, and then what you deliver, it's either a quality product or it's not.
Yeah.
And so then you make more adjustments, right? I mean, we've been changing in the Army and transitioning in the Army since 1775.
Well, and the mindset of a leader in an organization to do that. Carolyn Dweck has written a book called it's talking about the growth mindset. And all three of us in our we all came to the Army in the 80s, and we didn't know what it was called, but that's what we were taught to have, was a growth mindset. Which constantly think about what you're doing, how you can do it better, and what you should be doing next. Anticipate that, and as you said, what is the right thing to deliver? What's the right order to give? What is the right piece of equipment? What's the priority? So you're constantly in that mindset. But I think where civilian leaders struggle with is, we were given the freedom to fail when we were younger. We were literally taught that go out and try it, fall flat on your face. We pick you up, we dust you off. We say, hey, it was a great attempt. You tried really. Try this next time, okay?
Chris, you're actually describing the last time I played golf with Mike.
You give Mike the freedom to fail.
I do every time we play.
And does he learn from the experience?
Well, yeah, but not fast enough. I'm inside his OODA loop on that one.
You know what though, Chris, this freedom to failure thing, you know,
Yeah.
as you were thinking about that, I don't know. I would say that I don't know that I would necessarily agree with that. And I'm thinking about all of the organizations, you know, that I've served in. And there certainly was, you know, there was certainly encouragement to innovate. And you know, there were some things I guess you could fail, right? There were some things that you could fail at, but I'll tell you what though, I don't know, Paul, about you, but I mean, you know, I grew up in an environment where, you know, terms like zero defects, you know, were used.
Yeah.
So I
And
don't
that
know.
was
I mean,
just at home. By the way, that's just at home, right? That's not in the office.
yeah. I would think though that today and maybe over the last 20 years, you know, we've accepted a lot more because we had to. I remember having a discussion with you know, one of my favorite generals, General Luck, and we were talking about, and he must have been at this time the 18th Airborne Corps commander, and I was, you know, battalion commander, and we were talking about, you know, OERs, and we were talking about, you know, some of the guys and gals commanding up and down Ardennes Street. So think 82nd Airborne Division. And he said, Mike, he goes, you know, those guys and gals who are there till 10, 11 o'clock every night, burning the midnight oil, he goes, they will not do well in combat. You know, they'll do well in a peacetime army because in a peacetime army, you can micromanage, you know, your organization and you can do that. He goes, they will fail in combat. And I never forgot that. And then actually, you know, I saw that, you know, in combat. So anyways, just going back to your, you know, the environment that we aspire to, right? One where, you know, we want you to feel like you have the freedom to fail. But I think in reality, it's hard to do.
I think the freedom to fail is not what we're really talking about. It's really you can miss a standard, but you better not miss it routinely. And frankly, because if we're holding each other accountable and are working our way towards what we, you know, I don't like. Yeah, I agree with Mike. I'm not a big fan of failure, mostly because I got, you know, in the military, we're dealing with, like I said, America's most precious treasure, its sons and daughters, right?
Right.
So if we can fail in training so that we can prevail in war. That's really the case. And failure, you know, it's kind of like Star Trek. If you remember the Kobarachi Maru, right? You remember that William Shatner finally won that one because he went outside the box and made a decision.
He cheated
because it was the unbeatable problem set, right?
Right.
That's what we get paid to do. We get paid, you know, through the planning and the techniques Mike has highlighted and I'm talking about a little bit. We get paid to take incredibly complex things and put them in common standards and terms that a squad leader and his or her soldiers can execute anywhere in the world. That's what we get paid to do. Failure is not a big part of that.
No, and I wish I would have been a little bit more clear before I got you two beating me up.
Take that.
Both of you, all three of us have had our you know what's handed to us at a training.
Yes, that is true.
That burned into our brain so much that we never did it again.
Yes.
And it burned into our brain so much that we found 9 ways to solve the problem when we thought there was only one.
Yeah.
And the one that we thought was the most important was the one that got us killed in training.
Right.
And so the point I'm trying to make with the growth mindset is our minds grew as young men
Yeah,
in a profession that has critical, terrible outcomes if we fail in combat.
yes,
So we were put in these crucibles to have the risk underwritten. And Mike, I would argue those people on our dance, those are the ones who are afraid of failing. They're working till 10 o'clock at night, micromanaging every single statistic. So on paper, they look awesome. And the person who's taken the risk is the one who left at 5 because he's entrusting his subordinates. Because I know as my commander, you're my commander, you're going to underwrite the risk. And something happens that night, you'll say, Chris, you didn't have a system to prevent that. Stay a little later tonight, put the system in place,
yeah,
then entrust it. But you're not going to relieve me the first time I get caught with my pants down.
that's
That's
right.
that's what, and so what DeWick is talking about is A students that go to high school students who are A students get into college and they fail their freshman year. It's actually their first semester freshman year at a 55%, 57% percentage rate because they've never been failed and they've never been challenged. And
Mhm.
all of a sudden, when they're put in the crucible of college and they're not automatically a simple A and they get a B, they fold. They just collapse when the stress is on. And so what I like about what she teaches, employers is how do you as a boss underwrite the risk to build the
Yeah.
trust that they can take that risk, not gamble, but take risk with the possibility of failure in hopes that they'll grow and find better ways to do it in the future. That's kind of where I was going. I didn't mean to go down.
It's like it's being part of a learning organization. Do we learn? You learn in two. I think two ways: significant emotional experience, like you're talking about, or repetition. Right. So
Yeah.
you've done that task so many times, and that's what we train to. That's what we become. Right. Is we train task conditions and standards in
Right.
order to achieve positive outcomes. That's what we do. That's what we do, and it doesn't matter. How high up the flagpole you go, you just got to make sure that you're adhering to the standards.
Yep. Agree.
But
Anything else?
also, it also, well, I mean, it also goes back to, the other point of having the audio and video,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
so again, and I guess that was a little bit of frustration that I was expressing earlier is, I've had so many leaders who say one thing about, yeah, we want you to do this and it's okay to fail. And
Oh,
then, you watch what happens when somebody fails and they're turned
Yeah.
into a heap of ash, right? And I guess that's what I was,
Yeah.
remembering back to. But again, I always told myself I would not be that person. I mean, it's just
Yeah.
like, what I tried to tell, and this is now the memory is as a battalion commander, so 750 paratroopers, trying to tell them how important it is for them to, how important my family is to me, and how, it helps and guides me and is a source of strength. And if I were to be at home or if I were to be at work every night, till 10, 11 o'clock, in the office, every weekend, the question that a lot of those folks would ask, just like I would ask, because I listened to some of these other people
Yeah.
about how important their families were when that's not what you saw. So
That's
that
right.
was the point.
yeah.
That Mike's exactly right. If you can't tell, I'm in the Mike Garrett Appreciation Club because, frankly, that what he just said is all right. I would leave when I was a squadron commander, which was a much cooler job than being a paratroop battalion commander. But what I would do, I coached all my kids' sports. I left the office at 6 o'clock. That was the latest I ever stayed.
Yeah.
And I didn't come in on the weekends because unless we were in the field, and if when we were in the field, we were serious about it, right? Because everybody knew that's where we were going to be, and we'd move the whole outfit out there and figure it out. So, but if you have the time and opportunity to go home to your families, if you say they're important, it's like family time. I can't tell. When I was the Corps commander, uh, I and a division commander. I would drive around on about at 1500 on Thursdays when we said we were supposed to release everybody. And so I would just sit in a parking lot and watch. And I got there's a couple of colonels. Yeah, I didn't get excited about much, but there's a couple of colonels in the Big Red One who learned pretty fast. I meant what I said about that, right? Because they would go back in their office. Oh, you weren't really serious about it. Yeah, I was. And so we learned that, but that's what you have to do. Sometimes you got to model that and then go home, right? So I'm not saying you walk away from the work. You may have to do it someplace else, but most of the time I just did.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, you created your own controlled
Yes,
significant emotional event.
exactly right. You only have to do that about 1 or 2 times, right? And people kind of get the message.
Yeah. I found a bunch of soldiers waiting in their vehicles with the engines running, waiting for family time because the company didn't schedule anything that in the afternoon. So the kids would sit in their vehicles the air conditioning on in Georgia waiting for their release. And so I had a formation out back myself and I let them go. And I went inside to let the company commander first sergeant know I let this company go for the day. And they didn't take long for that to stop.
That's right. So, Mike talked about his upbringing and how, I got to watch that from my vantage point, watch my dad be the old man in a bunch of different things. And I mean, his favorite saying was talking ain't fighting, right? You can, if and like Mike said, the audio's got to match the video. So all those kind of quips and isms really do mean something. And if you take the time to define them to people as or be an exemplar for them, they end up making sense, right?
Very much. And as you guys, I'm sure you did, and you learned in droves like me, you have to repeat. You get your set things, you have to repeat it over and over and over again. At the end of the first year, you start finding people have never heard it before. It's because they're all new people. You got
we don't understand turnover, and people don't understand that in civilian organizations either.
Yeah,
they don't understand it.
Let me ask you both. So over your career, I'm sure you've developed some sort of innate, probably, maybe not just innate, but ways that you look across the group of leaders and go, that one, and that one. And you pick them to do certain things for you based upon what you personally need. In other words, you know your strengths and weaknesses, and you pick these people out. Tell us about that process, if you have one, so other leaders can kind of emulate or think theirs through.
Yeah, I'll start on this one. One, I think the Army has a great process by which we assess talent. I mean, think about it. As a battalion commander, I had 30 lieutenants, and I chose to ordinarily rank them 1 to 30. And the requirement was counseling in writing twice a year. And so in writing twice a year, I told number 1 he was number 1, and I told number 30 he was number 30. And that does a couple things for you. One, you're meeting a process requirement, right? That's part of the Army's talent management process. You're meeting your leader development requirement. You're telling all of them, even the number 1 guy, you're telling them or gal, what they can do to be better, and where you see room for improvement. The number 30 guy, it's a different discussion, right? And it's not that they're, they may just be in the wrong branch, which was, often the case. I can remember and I've been telling this story so long that I had to go back and talk to, the guy that I referenced just to make sure I had it exactly right. And he said, "Sir, you got it exactly right." But he was like number, I don't know, 22 or something. And he called bullshit on it. He goes, "Sir, respectfully, I am not number 22. So we went through everybody, and I actually told him, I said, "All right, look," I said, "after 10 or after 15, it really doesn't matter."
Yeah, that's right.
And so now, you're really in these bands of 5, right? But I said, here's the deal. I said, the bottom line is you're a very talented guy, but you're not as talented as, the people that I assess ahead of you for these reasons. And I said, what I would do if I were you, I'd start thinking seriously about, are you cut out to be an infantryman? Because I'm telling you, as a brand new second lieutenant and first lieutenant, you're going to make captain, but you might not make major if you continue to compete with these guys and gals. So you can make an informed decision. Well, that happens. So think that's lieutenants, right? You're doing the same thing with captains, and that cohort is called for you, right? People command. So we choose commanders. So that reduces the population. You get to be majors. We choose our battalion operations and executive officers. That calls that formation. And so 2 points. And the first one is the Army has a really good process, I think, for developing leaders, but helping leaders assess and make good decisions. The second part of this is, and this is at the corporate level of the Army. The Army's board of directors are the standing 4-star generals in our Army. And those generals, they are managing the senior officer talent and looking at who our next senior leaders are going to be in the Army. I mean, in every quarter, we met and spent most of our time talking about people. The best civilian organizations that I have been a part of over the last 18 months, those leaders, the leaders that have impressed me most are the leaders who know their people. I mean, almost brought a tear to my eye sitting in one of these board meetings. And this was the board meeting where we talked about talent, where this CEO was talking about 5 levels down in different lines of business. His intimate knowledge of these people it reminded me of military leadership, where every single person counts, and it's the boss's, the commander's responsibility to know his folks. So anyways, I know that was probably more than you wanted, Paul.
Mike, you hit the nail on the head. You have to know your organization, you got to know the people, and then you've got to develop a system. And I did the same thing Mike did as a squadron commander at battalion level. I rank ordered folks, and then I brought them in, and I gave them, just like he said, I said, maybe you would be better in the acquisition corps. Or maybe, I would I'd say, here are your strengths, and here's where I think you need development. And by the way, you can get more development if you go do this X, Y, or Z. Some listened, some didn't. One of them, the number 30th, might have gotten a little intoxicated and drove his golf cart into a pond at the golf course. That was not good in my outfit, even though, I said maybe he'd be better as a submarine commander. But that's what you got to know your organization, right? So I actually did the same thing at the division level. So I would bring in all those incredibly super high-speed talented folks. I'd lay out priorities. I'd say, here's what this is what I value. This is how it is. Here's how it's defined, and this is how I measure. And then when it came time, as Mike said, for their counseling, it was pretty easy to me. It was cut and dry. I say, here's where we said we were going to look each other in the eye and hold each other to standard about, and you either did or didn't. And that worked incredibly well, even at that level. But if you really want to, anytime you get the opportunity to get some high-speed type A personalities in a room, have them put their heads down and say, okay, how many of you people are in the top 10%? Every one of them raises their hand. Every one of them. And so, at some points, it's a math problem. But finding ways to find the talent and put the talent in the right places, and to actually tell them, here's where I see your strengths, and here's where I think the next 3 jobs for you to do to help you get better, but to build on your strengths. That's the conversation, in my opinion. People want to know where they can go and how they can grow.
Right. Now, realizing that you both grew up, we all grew up in an environment where we consumed our own talent. If
Yeah.
we had a hole, we didn't go hire. Now we could go hire from someplace else in the Army. So
Yeah.
let's just put you guys as two senior CEOs, humongous organizations, billions of dollar budgets.
Yeah.
There had to be times where the two of you were trying to figure out, I I don't know. I'm gonna take a chance here. I'm betting you picked your initiatives group colonel. I'm betting you picked
Yes.
chief of staff. I'm betting you picked your aide. There were certain people in your organization over time that you used your own personal experience to figure out what is the dynamic that I want to have in my immediate staff to make me, the CEO, the most efficient and smartest person in the organization.
Yeah.
How do you guys approach that from a CEO perspective?
I think Michael say that, and he's very good at this. He'll say, "I pick people that could fill in where my weaknesses were."
Okay.
So that, and Mike will articulate that better. But that's what I did. I picked.
Tell us how you did that. What was
Yeah,
your
I looked at the talent across the space at the time. My last executive officer was a Hispanic female colonel, MI, who had been to Tufts University. It was an incredibly articulated woman at Training and Doctrine Command, because that was a demographic of people that we were trying to appeal to, and I was looking for the very best of that ilk to help me help them and to communicate that you could, and so people could look up and see that she was a shining example of what you can do in our Army. So I was looking for that kind of talent, because I didn't live in her shoes. I didn't know, how hard it was to do those kinds of things in our organization. So I picked her because she was brilliant. She was a marathon runner and met all my criteria. You had to be physically fit. You had to be incredibly articulate. You had to be able to show and develop vision and build teams. And she met all those criteria, and so that I think for the organization to be able to see that you could succeed, being different than the boss was important.
Okay. Mike, anything from you, sir?
Yeah. So all of those positions, I think first and foremost, and I think it's the same thing in corporate America. You pick people who have shown the potential, to serve at, higher levels. And, age are one thing. So you're picking young, captains, majors, who have already separated themselves through performance, from their peers. And so there's a small group of those folks that you are trying to give this opportunity to, right? The second piece for me, and the most important thing for me, and I only screwed it up maybe twice when I think about people, but I always tried to pick people who were comfortable closing the door and giving me their honest and candid feedback,
Yes.
even if I didn't want to hear it.
That's right.
I had some who did it better than others. It's kind of hard for a captain to tell a two-star general, so that's not exactly fair. But I did have a couple of really strong captains who would give me, good feedback. But really the colonel XOs, right? So your executive officers, every one of those colonels were colonels that would close the door and would give me frank, honest, and sometimes, hard to hear feedback. And I think I valued that more than anything else. And like Paul, I also picked people, who helped, who were smart and proficient in areas that maybe I wasn't. But for me, because this is the ultimate trust,
Yes.
position. And, you know, that's the other thing that you're looking for, is somebody that, you know, you can trust implicitly, and they can, you know, in turn, trust you.
Yeah, that the trust is paramount. And, you know, you want to make sure that the people you surround yourself with, you can trust to give you honest feedback, like Mike is saying, because you got to spend a lot of time with them.
Let's end on this last question, if you don't mind, gentlemen, because you've segued into the word trust. How, I mean, we could talk about trust for 3 days, but I am sure that you know the amount of time that you two have spent in uniform, you can. I mean, you. I don't know if you agree with this, but I always thought that there was a requisite level of theatrics associated in leadership in the Army. It goes back to that, you know, setting the conditions for a significant emotional event, which may or may not be a real event that we kind of create the situation for to see what the young individual would do. But I'm sure that there's things that you've done in that light where you've deliberately gone out of your way to prove to the people you lead that they can trust you. Is there any vignettes or stories of where something like that has given you an opportunity to create that environment to display what you're talking about, General Garrett, about, you know, living, walking the walk, talking the talk, putting yourself out there and displaying something that helped to reinforce the trust across your formation?
Yeah, it goes back to what I said at the very beginning of this, and that is, you know, leading by example, and doing everything that you can to ensure that the audio and video are in alignment. And I tell you, there is nothing harder than that. You know, I think what people will tell you that know Mike Garrett is that, you know, if I said something, I meant it. And if I asked other people to do it, you know, I tried to do it, right? I didn't always get it right, just like they don't always get it right. But I think it is, and this is the hard part, Chris. I mean, you know, I've known lots of really smart people who've had, you know, these great goals and visions for their organizations. But in my mind, and not just a few of them, but unfortunately, these are some iconic men who lost me because at the end of the day, they were hypocrites.
Yep.
And what happens is, you know, the higher you go, the easier it is to separate yourself from your people. The easier it is for you to see yourself in a privileged position, the easier it is for you to excuse yourself from some of the standards that apply to, you know, the folks that you lead. And I would argue that it is the hardest thing to do. And you have to have people around you that are reminding you, just like, you know, you are modeling behavior, but they are reminding you of, you know, what our standards are and what we said was important. And I tell you, I don't think anything imbues more trust than that. You know, because soldiers talk amongst themselves, right? And you know, I often say that it would break my heart if, you know, soldiers were to say that, you know, Mike Garrett was a phony, all those things that he talked about being important. All you have to do is look at the way he lived his life, and you would not see those things. And so, you know, for me, you know, the hardest, and not hard, it wasn't hard at all. It was a noble endeavor. I gave it my best shot every day, but that was to lead everybody, you know, in a way that was, that provided an example for them, and motivation for them, right? I mean, if some 60-year-old dude can do this, you know, I don't have an excuse, you know,
Yeah.
kind of. So for me, it goes back again to where we started, and that's how you develop trust in an
Yeah.
organization.
You live it every day, right? So I, yeah, the guy I trust most in the world just finished speaking, and because I know, like Grant, I think it was Sherman said of Grant or Grant said of Sherman. I can't remember which way it went. I know if he was still alive and I was in trouble, he would come for me. I know that to be the absolute bedrock of trust and truth. I also believe that, I mean, it's pretty easy to demonstrate trust when it's 70 degrees and you're out there in your shorts and you're running down Battalion or whatever avenue and showing off. But trust is built when the chips are down, when it's raining sideways and you got a trooper somewhere on a cold, lonely post in the middle of a combat zone, and he or she is defending the men and women who are sleeping inside that tent or inside that forward operating base. And that trust is inherent in what it is we do, this brotherhood and sisterhood that is of the combat soldier. I, like Mike, in my fundamentals, number 40 is taken from a book called Legacy. And in that book, it says, you don't own the jersey. You're just the body in the jersey at the time. So you need to leave that jersey in a better place every day. Mike Garrett and I got the opportunity to wear the jersey of the greatest team ever assembled, United States Army. And our job, our position in life, afforded us the opportunity to leave that jersey in a better place every day. And so that's all I ever tried to do. And, that I think we did okay.
You did more than okay. And you've inspired me to end this with the great quote from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. The ultimate measure of a man is not where he stands in moments of comfort and convenience, but where he stands in moments of great challenge and controversy. And you gentlemen have done so. And I appreciate your time today. And I know everyone who watches this will appreciate your many years of service, putting that jersey away for all the rest of the kids to carry on after you. So thank you for your leadership and your expertise and your mentorship. Thank you, gentlemen.